The Johnson home sat quietly under a moonless sky, the kind of deep silence that blankets a neighborhood when the world has long since fallen asleep. Inside, the rhythmic sound of a baby's breath was the only sign of life in the dim nursery. Emma, just 6 months old, lay curled beneath a soft blanket in her crib, utterly peaceful. Her tiny chest rose and fell gently as she dreamed in the safety of her parents' cozy house. Upstairs, Mark and Sarah, exhausted from the day's work, and the endless demands of new parenthood, were deep in a heavy, dreamless sleep. Outside, the night was still and cold. The wind barely stirred the leaves, and the occasional distant bark of a dog was swallowed by the quiet. But in the Johnsons' backyard, one figure was anything but still. Max, their 4-year-old German shepherd, sat rigidly by the back door, his amber eyes gleaming in the faint moonlight that peeked through the clouds. The dog's ears twitched constantly, picking up sounds imperceptible to human ears. Max's powerful body was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. Something was wrong. Mark and Sarah had always known Max was special. He was loyal, intelligent, and fiercely protective of their family, especially baby Emma. But tonight Max's alertness was different. It was as if an invisible danger hovered near, unseen but deeply sensed. Max sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, and his tail, usually calm and still when indoors, began to twitch nervously. At exactly 3 a.m. something shifted. A faint acrid scent wafted through the air, a trace of smoke barely noticeable but enough to set Max on high alert. His ears pinned back slightly, and he let out a low, urgent growl. Then, suddenly, Max sprang to his feet and padded silently toward the nursery. The soft click of his paws on the hardwood floor broke the stillness, but neither Mark nor Sarah stirred yet. Max reached Emma's crib and lowered himself, sniffing the air around her. The baby stirred, but did not wake. Max nudged her gently with his nose, trying to rouse her, his eyes wide and intense with a clear sense of purpose. Then, something remarkable happened. Max carefully grasped the corner of Emma's blanket with his teeth. It was a delicate, precise movement, executed with the gentleness of a mother. Slowly, Max began tugging, pulling the blanket and the sleeping baby toward the open back door. Upstairs, Mark's eyes snapped open. The faint sound of movement downstairs had disturbed his sleep. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "something's wrong." Sarah's eyes fluttered open as Mark hurried from their bedroom, adrenaline already flooding his veins. He raced down the stairs, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. In the nursery, Mark froze in disbelief. There was Max, calmly but insistently tugging on Emma's blanket, pulling her slowly out of the crib. The baby was still asleep, undisturbed by the strange but gentle motion. "Max, what are you doing?" Mark called softly but firmly. Max's eyes locked with Mark's for a moment, and then, without hesitation, the dog continued his mission, dragging the blanket toward the slightly ajar back door. Sarah, now fully awake, appeared behind Mark. Her breath caught in her throat. "Is he taking her outside?" she whispered, dread creeping into her voice. The back door was just a few feet away, barely cracked open, but Max pushed it wider with his snout. The cold night air brushed against Emma's skin as Max stepped onto the porch, blanket and baby in tow. Mark's mind raced. Was there a fire? An intruder? Danger? He couldn't tell. All he knew was that Max, his loyal dog, was acting with purpose, urgency, and care, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Without hesitation, Mark followed them out into the darkness. Sarah close behind. The night had changed in an instant. What had begun as a silent, peaceful sleep was now charged with tension, mystery, and a rapidly growing fear that something terrible was about to unfold. The night air hit Mark's face, like a cold splash of reality as he stepped outside, the weight of the situation settling in immediately. Max's powerful frame moved with purpose across the porch, carrying Emma's blanket gently but steadily. Mark's heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He glanced down. Emma was still sleeping, her tiny face calm and undisturbed by the chill of the night or the strange adventure unfolding around her. Sarah followed closely, her hands trembling as she pulled her robe tighter around her. "Max, what's going on?" she whispered to the dog. But Max only glanced back once, his eyes intense and unwavering. There was no time for explanations, and no time for hesitation. The backyard, usually a safe haven filled with the faint rustle of leaves and the gentle buzz of summer insects, now seemed ominous and heavy. The sky was darker than usual, the clouds hiding the stars, and the moon had disappeared behind thick, rolling fog. Max's nostrils flared as he picked up a scent on the wind, his ears pricked forward, body taut with alertness. Mark hurried to catch up, eyes scanning the darkness. The familiar yard suddenly felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. Then through the thick air a faint glow flickered. It was distant at first, but unmistakable, a warm, eerie orange that pulsed softly like a warning beacon. Max didn't slow down. If anything, his pace quickened. "Is it fire?" Sarah gasped, clutching Emma closer. The baby's peaceful, sleeping face contrasted sharply with the rising panic in her mother's eyes. Emma's small fingers curled around Sarah's sleeve as if sensing the tension. Mark felt a surge of fear, but forced himself to stay calm. "Stay close," he said quietly. The family followed Max's lead toward the source of the glow. The path wasn't long, just past the garden shed at the back of their yard, but every step felt heavier with dread. As they rounded the corner, the scene that greeted them was horrifying. Flames flickered and danced along the edges of the old wooden shed, smoke curling up into the sky like sinister fingers reaching for the stars. The fire was small for now, but growing fast, licking hungrily at the wood's dry surface. Sparks crackled and drifted upward, threatening to ignite the nearby trees. Max stopped, standing tall and proud between the fire and the family. His tail was rigid, eyes locked on the flames, and his low growl rumbled from deep in his throat. Emma was safe in Sarah's arms, but the danger was clear. The fire could spread quickly, and the house wasn't far behind. Mark's mind raced. How did this start? He wondered aloud. The shed stored garden tools and some old furniture, nothing particularly flammable, yet the fire had found its way here, almost like a cruel accident, or worse, something deliberate. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "We could have lost everything," she whispered, hugging Emma tightly. "Max saved her. Saved us." Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The image of Max pulling Emma from the crib replayed in his mind, a surreal, almost unbelievable act of bravery. No one had taught the dog to do this. No one had prepared him for this moment. It was pure instinct, pure love. Suddenly, Max barked sharply, breaking the moment. His attention shifted to the house again, then back to the fire. Mark looked toward the house. The windows were dark, the bedrooms silent. Had the fire started even closer? Was the house in danger? He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911, giving their address with urgency. "There's a fire in our backyard," he explained breathlessly. "We need help right away." The seconds dragged as Mark, Sarah, and Max waited, watching the flames inch closer to the fence. Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, her little eyes fluttering open. Max nudged her gently, as if reassuring her that she was safe now. Mark's gaze never left the fire. The neighbors, awakened by the flickering glow, began to step outside, calling out with concern. Someone flicked on the porch light across the street, illuminating the terrifying scene. And then, as if summoned by their desperation, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. Relief washed over the family in a rush. Help was coming. But Max was not finished. His job wasn't over. He barked again and paced along the edge of the yard, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, protective and vigilant. The dog had saved the baby and now stood guard, ready to face whatever came next. Mark exchanged a glance with Sarah. "We owe him everything," he said quietly. "Our Max, he's a hero." The fire was spreading, but Max's courage was unyielding, and for the Johnsons, hope had been reignited in the darkest hour. Max's paws crunched softly on the dew-soaked grass as he led Mark and Sarah further away from the fiery glow of the shed. Emma, still wrapped snugly in Sarah's arms, remained asleep despite the tension hanging thick in the air. It was almost surreal. How could the baby be so calm when the world around her was unraveling? Mark's mind was racing, heart pounding against his ribs like a drumbeat of warning. The fire was a deadly predator, threatening to devour everything they loved, and Max was their only line of defense. But why had the dog pulled Emma out? How had he known something was wrong? The answer became clearer as they moved farther from the house. Max stopped suddenly near the garden fence, nose to the ground, sniffing furiously. Mark's eyes followed the dog's gaze and froze. A faint glow was flickering not just from the shed, but also from a small pile of cardboard boxes stacked dangerously close to the side of the house. Smoke curled ominously, and the acrid smell grew stronger. "No," Sarah breathed, stepping back as realization hit. "It's spreading. Faster than we thought." Mark's fingers clenched into fists. They had maybe minutes, if that, to get everyone safe. "Max, stay close," he urged, voice shaking with urgency. The dog didn't hesitate. His protective instincts were sharper than ever. Max positioned himself between Sarah, Emma, and the encroaching fire, growling low and fierce. It was as if he was daring the flames to come closer. Suddenly, a loud crack shattered the night, the sound of burning wood splitting apart. Sparks exploded upward, and a sudden gust of wind fanned the flames, pushing the fire closer to the house's exterior. Sarah gasped, clutching Emma tighter. "We need to get out of here now." Mark nodded, pulling out his phone again. The 911 operator's voice was calm but insistent. "Firefighters are on their way. Stay safe and keep a clear path for emergency crews." He scanned the yard, every window, trying to map out an escape plan in his head. The back door was already open thanks to Max, but the flames threatened to block their way. The front of the house was still dark and silent. "Let's go front," Mark said, gripping Sarah's hand. "We'll leave the back for the firefighters." With Max leading the way, the family moved cautiously through the side yard, careful to avoid sparks and smoke. Emma stirred, her tiny fingers clutching at Sarah's shirt as if sensing the danger around her. Sarah whispered soothing words, trying to keep both herself and her baby calm. As they reached the front yard, the sound of sirens grew louder, and bright red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Mark felt a surge of relief wash over him. Help was close. Firefighters leapt from their trucks, hoses unfurling and water spraying toward the flames. Max barked happily, wagging his tail, but never letting go of his protective stance near Emma. Mark watched the firefighters work tirelessly, battling the fire's ferocity with steady determination. The smoke was thick, choking and black, but the blaze was slowly coming under control. The house was still standing, its wooden frame battered but intact. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the captain of the fire crew approached. "Mark and Sarah, thanks to your dog, this was caught early. You saved your home and your family," he said solemnly. Mark looked down at Max, who was panting but proud. "He's more than a dog," Mark said softly. "He's family." Sarah nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. Max pulled Emma out of the crib before we even knew there was a fire. "He saved our daughter." The fire captain smiled. "Animals have instincts we don't understand sometimes. Tonight your German shepherd was a hero." Mark and Sarah held Emma tightly, grateful beyond words. They had escaped disaster thanks to the courage of a dog who had risked everything to protect his family. As the fire crews continued to douse the last flames, the Johnsons stood together, wrapped in blankets and comforted by neighbors who had come outside to offer support. Max lay quietly at their feet, finally able to relax now that the danger had passed, but the memory of those frantic moments, the glowing fire, the cold night air, and Max's fierce determination would stay with them forever. The fire trucks had pulled away, their engines now quiet but leaving a smoky haze lingering over the Johnsons' backyard. The glow of the fading flames cast long shadows across the lawn, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt wood and melting plastic. Mark and Sarah stood together, still clutching Emma, staring in disbelief at the charred remains of the shed. It was hard to comprehend what had just happened. One moment everything was peaceful, the next their home had been threatened by fire, and all because of Max, their loyal German shepherd whose instincts had kicked in before anyone else's. Sarah wiped her tears with the sleeve of her robe. "I can't believe he just pulled her out like that," she murmured, her voice trembling. "He saved her life." Mark nodded silently, his eyes fixed on Max, who was now resting quietly at their feet. The dog looked tired but calm, his eyes still sharp and alert. Mark crouched down to stroke Max's fur. "You're a hero, buddy," he whispered. The night's events replayed vividly in their minds, how Max had sensed the danger long before they did, how carefully he had tugged the blanket with Emma wrapped inside, how calmly he had led them to safety despite the chaos around them. It was almost unbelievable. Suddenly, a soft crackling noise caught Mark's attention. He looked toward the side of the house where the fire had almost spread. The fence was scorched, some of the wooden panels blackened and brittle. The grass near the shed was singed, and the smell of smoke still hung heavily in the air. "What if the fire had spread inside?" Sarah asked, panic creeping back into her voice. "We could have lost everything." Mark's jaw tightened. "We were lucky," he said quietly. "Max's instincts saved us all." As the family stood in the smoky yard, neighbors began to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the commotion. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached cautiously, her face pale with concern. "Are you all okay?" she asked, glancing nervously at the charred remains. Sarah smiled weakly. "Thanks to Max, yes. He pulled Emma out before the fire even got near the house." Mrs. Henderson shook her head in amazement. "That dog is something else. I don't know what I'd do without him." Mark turned away, his mind still racing. The fire department had left behind investigators who were now examining the scene for the cause of the blaze. Was it an electrical fault? A careless cigarette? Or something more sinister? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Suddenly, Max lifted his head and let out a low growl, his ears pinned back. Mark looked down the street and spotted a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping between the trees. The neighborhood was quiet, but the dog's reaction suggested something was off. "Easy, Max," Mark said soothingly, though his heart pounded. "We're safe now." Sarah glanced nervously toward the same direction. "Do you think someone was trying to start that fire?" Mark swallowed hard. The possibility chilled him. "We'll find out soon enough." Inside the house, the damage was minimal, just the back door slightly scorched, but the emotional scars were deep. Mark checked on Emma again, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his palm. She was asleep, untouched by the night's terror. "Let's get inside," he said finally. "We need to rest." Sarah hesitated but nodded, following Mark and Max back into the warmth of their home. As they closed the door behind them, the calm of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. But the questions remained. What had caused the fire? Was the threat really over? And how had Max known, without any training, to act so decisively? Mark sat down heavily on the couch, Emma still in Sarah's arms. Max settled at their feet, ever watchful. The family had been shaken to their core, but one thing was clear. Max had been their guardian angel that night, and whatever lay ahead, they knew they would face it together. The night had been long, but the urgency of the situation was far from over. The fire investigators were still combing through the charred remnants of the shed outside, while Mark and Sarah sat in their living room, trying to process everything that had just happened. Emma was finally asleep again, nestled safely in Sarah's arms, but the tension in the room was palpable. Mark's phone buzzed, a message from the local fire chief. "We're on the case. We'll keep you updated." But that offered little comfort. Mark's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if the fire had been intentional? What if it was only the beginning? As they sat quietly, Max suddenly stood, ears pricked and nose twitching. He padded toward the front door and stopped, staring into the darkness beyond the porch. Mark and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Max had been their protector all night, sensing danger before anyone else. Now, his unease was growing again. Mark cautiously opened the door a crack and peered outside. The night was still, but something felt wrong, an unsettling stillness, like the calm before a storm. "Stay inside," Mark instructed Sarah quietly, gripping Emma tighter. Max's fur bristled as he scanned the shadows, growling low and warning. Minutes later, a loud crash shattered the fragile quiet. The sound came from the side yard, near the burned fence. Mark's heart jumped into his throat. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, wide-eyed. Max bolted toward the noise, barking furiously. Mark followed, the adrenaline surging. Outside, the fence had been knocked over, splintered wood scattered on the ground. Footprints trampled the grass, fresh and unmistakable. "They're still here," Mark said grimly, crouching to examine the prints. "Someone's trying to scare us." Sarah shivered, clutching Emma closer. "Why? What do they want?" Mark's jaw clenched. "I don't know, but we need to be ready." The fire department arrived again, alerted by the noise and Max's barking. Officers began patrolling the neighborhood, lights sweeping the streets. The police assured the Johnsons they do everything to protect the family. But the tension was thick. Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak and rustle a possible threat. Max stayed close, silent, but alert. The ever-vigilant guardian. Hours passed with no further incidents, but the Johnsons couldn't sleep. Exhaustion battled with anxiety. Finally, Mark suggested they rest in the living room, closer to Emma, while Max lay between them like a sentinel. Just as Mark was about to drift off, the phone rang. His heart pounded as he answered. "Mr. Johnson, this is Detective Alvarez from the Fire Investigation Unit. We found some evidence indicating the fire was deliberately set." Mark's blood ran cold. "You mean arson?" "Yes. We're treating it as a criminal investigation. You and your family may be at risk." The line went silent for a moment. Mark looked at Sarah, eyes wide with disbelief. Emma stirred and Sarah whispered, "What do we do?" Detective Alvarez's voice came back. "We recommend you stay somewhere safe while we investigate, and keep Max close. He's already proven invaluable." Mark swallowed hard. "Thank you, Detective. We'll cooperate fully." After hanging up, Mark felt the weight of the situation. Crushed down on him. Their home, their sanctuary, was now a target, but they had Max. The dog's eyes met Mark's, full of unwavering loyalty and courage. In that moment, Mark knew they wouldn't back down. They would face whatever darkness came together. As dawn began to break, the Johnsons packed essentials, prepared to leave for a friend's house. Max stayed close, alert and ready, as if sensing the journey ahead. Outside, the neighborhood slowly awoke to the news of the fire and the heroic dog who had saved a sleeping baby. The story would spread fast, but for Mark and Sarah there was only one truth. Their family was lucky to have a guardian like Max. And now, the race against time had truly begun. The Johnsons packed hurriedly in the dim light of early morning, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on their shoulders. Emma, swaddled in her favorite blanket, was still groggy from disrupted sleep, but calm in her mother's arms. Max moved quietly around the room, his keen eyes flicking toward every shadow, alert for any sign of danger. Mark and Sarah exchanged a glance full of exhaustion and resolve. Their home had been violated, threatened by fire set deliberately, and no one knew who was behind it or why. But the family wasn't going to wait for answers. They had to get somewhere safe and fast. Mark's phone buzzed again with a text from Detective Alvarez. "We recommend a safe house while the investigation continues." A friend offered a place. Relief flooded through Mark. At least they had a place to go. The drive to their friend's house was tense but quiet. Max sat alert in the back seat, occasionally glancing at Emma nestled in Sarah's lap. "The baby," cooed softly, unaware of the storm surrounding her. Once inside the safe house, a small, sturdy home on the other side of town, Mark and Sarah breathed a tentative sigh of relief. The house felt like a fortress compared to their vulnerable home. Max immediately explored the new space, sniffing every corner, but relaxed slightly, sensing no immediate threat. Mark sat down with the detective's file that had been left for them. The investigation had revealed that the fire wasn't just an accident or random act, it was targeted. Someone had deliberately set the blaze near the Johnsons' home. The question, why? Sarah, holding Emma close, whispered, "Who would want to hurt us?" Mark shook his head, frustration and fear mingling in his eyes. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they're dangerous." That night, as the family tried to rest, Max's vigilance never waned. His ears twitched at every sound, the creak of floorboards, the distant howl of a stray dog, even the soft ticking of a clock. Emma slept peacefully, but Sarah felt every nerve on edge. Around midnight, a sudden crash jolted them awake. Max sprang to his feet, teeth bared in a low growl. Mark grabbed a flashlight and cautiously crept toward the noise. Outside, a window near the back was shattered, glass scattered across the porch. Mark's heart pounded. Someone had been here. He shone the beam across the yard, but the shadows swallowed any sign of the intruder. Max barked sharply, pacing, alert and defensive. Sarah clutched Emma tightly, eyes wide with fear. "We're not safe," she whispered. Mark locked the doors and windows, his mind racing. This was no longer just a fire. It was harassment, intimidation, a message. But what was it trying to say? The next morning, police arrived promptly to increase patrols around the safe house. Detectives took fingerprints and collected evidence from the broken window. Mark answered their questions, exhaustion evident in his voice. Despite the fear, Mark felt a new determination rising. Max's courage had saved their daughter once. Now the family would stand together, stronger than ever. Days passed with heightened security. The investigation revealed a few chilling facts, traces of accelerant found near the shed, and signs that the intruder had been lurking for days. There was no doubt the fire was no accident. Neighbors began sharing whispers of a stranger, spotted near the Johnsons' home days before the fire. A dark figure lurking in the shadows. The community, once peaceful, now simmered with anxiety. Sarah and Mark clung to each other, leaning on their friends and neighbors for support. Max remained their steadfast protector, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, ready to defend his family at a moment's notice. One evening, as Sarah rocked Emma to sleep, Mark sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker. The mystery remained unsolved, the threat looming, but the family had hope. Max rested his head on Mark's lap, a silent promise in his steady gaze. No matter what came next, they would face it together. The days at the safe house dragged on like a slow-moving storm. Mark and Sarah were exhausted, their nerves raw from the constant fear of an unseen enemy lurking just beyond their reach. Max remained a silent sentinel, his protective instincts sharper than ever, his eyes never resting for long. Detective Alvarez had promised to keep them informed, but progress was frustratingly slow. The police were combing through evidence, interviewing neighbors and scouring surveillance footage from nearby homes. Yet the arsonist remained elusive, a ghost in the night. One afternoon, as Sarah prepared lunch, Mark sat at the small kitchen table reviewing some of the photos taken at the fire scene. Burn patterns, accelerant residue, footprints, details that meant little to a layman but suggested deliberate intent. Something didn't add up. A sudden knock at the door made both of them jump. Mark opened it to find a middle-aged man with a solemn expression, wearing a badge pinned to his jacket. "Detective Alvarez," Mark said, stepping aside to let him in. "Thank you for seeing me," the detective said, his voice low but urgent. "We've uncovered something important. You need to hear this." Sarah sat beside Mark, clutching Emma, who was napping peacefully in her arms. "We believe the fire and the break-in were part of a coordinated effort," Alvarez began. "The person responsible isn't random. They know you. They're sending a message." Mark's heart sank. "Who? Why?" Alvarez hesitated. "We've identified a suspect connected to a recent dispute involving your business. Someone who's been watching you for weeks," Sarah gasped. "But we've kept things private. How did they find us?" "Somewhere along the way your information was leaked," Alvarez said grimly. "And that's not all." He reached into his folder and pulled out a set of photographs, grainy security camera stills showing a figure lurking near their home days before the fire. Max growled softly at the images, as if recognizing the threat. "Do you recognize him?" Alvarez asked. Mark studied the photos, heart pounding. The face was partially obscured by a hood, but something was familiar. Then it hit him. It's someone from the construction company we hired," Mark said, disbelief in his voice. "A man who had a grudge because we refused extra work." Alvarez nodded. "Exactly. He felt slighted and has escalated his anger." Sarah hugged Emma tighter, tears welling. "How do we stop him?" The detective stood. "We've increased patrols and will be stepping up surveillance, but you need to stay vigilant. and keep Max close. That night, Mark sat by the window, with Max at his feet. The quiet comfort of the dog was the only thing steady in his world. Emma slept peacefully in her crib, unaware of the dangers shadowing her family. Suddenly, a soft noise broke the stillness, a creak from the porch outside. Max's ears twitched. Mark held his breath. The front door rattled, then suddenly banged. Against the frame, Max leapt to his feet, barking fiercely, teeth bared. Mark grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the door. Outside, under the dim porch light, stood a shadowy figure. The man's hood concealed his face, but Max growled deeply, warning the intruder away. "Go home," Mark shouted, voice trembling. "We're calling the police." The figure hesitated, then disappeared into the night, leaving Mark shaken but resolute. That moment crystallized everything. The threat was real, but so was the bond between the Johnsons and Max, their protector, their hero. They would face the darkness together, ready for whatever came next. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a sharp contrast to the chaos and fear that had gripped the Johnson family for weeks. Mark, Sarah, and little Emma had spent the night at their friend's house under tight police protection. Max, though exhausted, remained vigilant, his eyes ever watchful. Detective Alvarez arrived. Early, his expression serious but hopeful. "We've coordinated with the police to set a trap tonight," he explained. "We're going to catch this guy red-handed." Mark felt a surge of relief. After days of uncertainty, they were finally taking action. As night fell, the Johnsons returned home, this time with officers stationed discreetly nearby and hidden cameras set up around the property. Max seemed to sense the tension, pacing restlessly as Sarah soothed Emma to sleep. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Then, just after midnight, Max stiffened, ears perked. A shadow moved near the back fence. Mark's heart hammered as he watched, the grainy black and white feed from the surveillance camera on his phone. The intruder crept toward the house, hooded and cautious. "Now!" Detective Alvarez whispered into his radio. Suddenly, police lights flashed, and officers emerged, surrounding the man before he could react. Max barked triumphantly, tail wagging. As the suspect was handcuffed and led away, Mark exhaled deeply, the weight of fear lifting at last. The suspect was identified as Derek, the disgruntled worker who had taken his anger too far. Motives of revenge and resentment had driven him to terrorize the family, but thanks to Max and the police, the threat was over. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to return to normal. The Johnsons repaired their home and rebuilt the Frey shed while the community rallied around them with support and admiration. Max, now hailed as a local hero, received endless pats and treats wherever he went. But for Mark and Sarah, Max was more than a hero. He was family, the loyal protector who had risked everything to save their daughter. One sunny afternoon, the family gathered in their rebuilt backyard, Emma laughing as Max chased a ball. Mark looked around at the smiling faces and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "This wouldn't have happened without him," Sarah said softly, her eyes shining with tears. Mark nodded. "He saved our lives. I don't know how we'll ever thank him enough." But they didn't have to wait long. At a community ceremony, Max was awarded a Medal of Bravery by the local fire department and police chief. The crowd cheered as Mark placed the shiny medal around Max's neck. Max wagged his tail happily, proud but humble. As the ceremony ended, a little girl approached and handed Emma a small handmade card. Inside, a drawing of Max with the words, "Thank you, Max, our hero." Mark smiled, tears welling. "Max has changed our lives forever," he whispered, but life had one more surprise in store. Weeks later, during a routine vet check, Max's vet discovered something unusual, a tiny lump. Concerned, they ran tests that revealed early-stage cancer. The news hit the family like a thunderbolt, but just as Max had faced fire and fear, he was now fighting a new battle. With unwavering determination, the Johnsons committed to giving Max the best care possible. And Max, ever the fighter, faced treatment with the same courage he had shown that terrifying night. Through it all, the bond between Max and the family grew even stronger. One quiet evening, as Mark sat beside Max's bed, he whispered, "You saved us, buddy. Now we're here for you." Max's eyes met his, filled with love and trust. Their story, a tale of bravery, love and resilience, was far from over. But one thing was certain: the German Shepherd who pulled a sleeping baby from a burning home was much more than a dog. Was a guardian, a hero and the heart of a family that loved him beyond words.